The water was cold. His hands were trembling. And the woman lying motionless on the hospital bed hadn't opened her eyes in 93 days. Dr. Daniel Adebayo squeezed the washcloth, watching dirty water drip back into the basin, and wondered if this single act of kindness would cost him everything. Outside Ward 7, rain pounded against cracked windows. Inside, the heart monitor beeped its lonely rhythm. The nurses had refused to come. The doctors had gone home. And Daniel, 28 years old with empty pockets and a heart too big for his own good, was about to do something that would change 2 lives forever. They called her the Ice Queen. Eleanor Blackwood. Billionaire. Empire builder. The woman who crushed competitors like insects and fired employees for sport. 3 months ago, she'd collapsed during a board meeting, her body shutting down mid-sentence as she prepared to destroy another rival's life. Now she lay here, forgotten by family, feared by staff, existing in that terrible space between death and life. And no one, not her son in London, not her sister in New York, not a single person in her vast empire, had bothered to simply sit with her and treat her like a human being. Daniel dipped the cloth into the water again, his stomach tight with fear. He needed this extra shift money. His mother's heart medication cost more than his monthly salary. But something about this assignment felt wrong. The night supervisor had offered him triple pay. Triple. Nobody paid that much, unless the job was dangerous or cursed, or both. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Daniel approached the bed slowly, his phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The generator had failed again. Eleanor's face came into view, pale and still, her once immaculate hair now matted against the pillow. Her hospital gown hung loose on her frame. And Daniel noticed what made his chest tighten with anger. She hadn't been properly bathed in weeks. The day staff had been too afraid, too lazy, too disgusted to touch her. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said softly, even though he knew she couldn't hear. "My name is Dr. Adebayo. I'm going to help you tonight." Inside her darkness, Eleanor Blackwood heard every word. She'd been trapped in this prison for what felt like an eternity. Awake, aware, unable to move or speak or scream. She'd heard the nurses mock her. She'd felt their rough, careless hands when they bothered to touch her at all. She'd listened to her son discuss her stock portfolio with more passion than her health. But this voice was different. This touch was gentle. Daniel began with her face, wiping away days of neglect with careful strokes. He talked as he worked, his voice low and kind in the empty room. "I know the staff here is afraid of you," he said. "They told me you're cursed. That bad things happen to people who get too close. But I don't believe in curses, Mrs. Blackwood. I believe in people. And every person deserves dignity." He moved to her arms, her shoulders, working with the tenderness he'd learned from his mother, the woman who'd taught him that wealth meant nothing if you lost your humanity in the pursuit of it. "My father died when I was 12, Daniel continued, the words spilling out in the darkness. "We couldn't afford the surgery he needed. I watched him fade away in a hospital not much different from this one, surrounded by doctors who could have saved him if we'd only had money." He paused, wringing out the cloth. "That's why I became a doctor. Not to get rich, though God knows that would help, but to make sure no one else's father dies because of a bank account balance." Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. This young man, poor beyond measure, was sharing his deepest pain with a stranger. With her, the woman who'd spent 20 years using money as a weapon. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice," Daniel admitted. "I'm sleeping in a storage room because I can't afford rent. My classmates are in private practice, driving nice cars, And here I am, working triple shifts just to buy my mother's medication. Thunder shook the windows. The heart monitor beeped steadily. Daniel worked in silence for a moment, then spoke again. But my mother told me something I'll never forget. She said wealth isn't measured in naira or dollars. It's measured in the lives you touch, the difference you make. He smiled sadly in the darkness. I hope she's right, because by any other measure, I'm completely broke. Inside her prison, Eleanor wanted to scream. She wanted to tell this beautiful, foolish young man that his mother was right, that Eleanor herself was living proof that all the money in the world meant nothing without purpose, without connection, without soul. She'd spent 20 years accumulating billions and losing everything that mattered. She remembered the day her daughter died. Sarah, 6 years old, blonde curls and bright laughter, taken by leukemia despite the best doctor's money could buy. Eleanor had been holding her hand when she slipped away, and something inside Eleanor had died too. The grief had been so enormous, so crushing, that Eleanor had decided never to feel anything that deeply again. She'd buried her heart with her daughter and built an empire on top of the grave. Daniel finished bathing her and carefully changed her gown, maintaining her modesty with practiced care. He brushed her hair gently, working out tangles that would have taken hours if anyone cared enough to notice. There, he said finally. Much better. You deserve to be comfortable, Mrs. Blackwood. Everyone does. As he gathered his supplies, Eleanor fought against her paralysis with every ounce of strength she had. Move, she commanded her body. Move! Show him! Tell him! Her right index finger twitched. Daniel froze, staring at her hand. Had he imagined it? The exhaustion, the darkness, his mind playing tricks. He leaned closer, watching. Nothing. The finger remained still. Good night, Mrs. Blackwood, he whispered, backing toward the door. I'll check on you before my shift ends. He didn't see her finger twitch again as he left. He didn't see the single tear that rolled down her cheek, the first movement her body had made in 93 days. Inside her darkness, Eleanor Blackwood was screaming, fighting, clawing her way back toward consciousness. Because for the first time in 20 years, someone had reminded her what it felt like to be human. The next morning, Daniel dragged himself to the nurse's station after 16 hours straight. Nurse Coma barely looked up when he reported the finger movement. That woman has been vegetative for 3 months, she said coldly. The family's already discussing pulling life support. Now you're seeing miracles? I'm reporting what I observed. What you observed is exhaustion. Go home, Dr. Adebayo. Sleep. Stop giving people false hope. Daniel wanted to argue, but the exhaustion won. He collapsed in his storage room and fell into dreamless sleep. He woke to his phone ringing. The director's office. His stomach dropped. 20 minutes later, Daniel stood in Dr. Okonkwo's office facing a nightmare. The director sat behind his massive desk, flanked by 2 lawyers in expensive suits and a woman whose cold eyes and designer clothes screamed wealth and power. Dr. Adebayo, Okonkwo began heavily. This is Mrs. Patricia Blackwood, Eleanor's sister, and these are representatives from the Blackwood estate. Daniel's mouth went dry. They were going to sue him, fire him, destroy everything he'd worked for. Last night you were alone with my sister, Patricia said, her voice like ice. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. I was assigned to Ward 7. And you bathed her? Yes, ma'am. It was medically necessary. We're not here to discuss medical necessity, one lawyer interrupted. We're here because this morning, for the first time in 93 days, Eleanor Blackwood opened her eyes. The room spun. Daniel grabbed a chair. She what? Patricia stood, arms folded. The day nurse found her awake at 7 a.m., conscious, eyes open and tracking. The neurologist called it impossible. The family calls it suspicious. Suspicious? Daniel's voice shook. I don't understand. The second lawyer leaned forward. Mrs. Blackwood has had the finest private care money can buy for 3 months. No improvement. Then one night, a junior doctor nobody's heard of is left alone with her, and suddenly she wakes up. You understand our concern. Your concern about what? Anger replaced fear. That I helped her? That I did my job? Our concern, Patricia said coldly, is what you might have done to trigger this. What medications you administered without authorization. What procedures you attempted. I bathed her. Daniel's voice rose. I talked to her. I treated her like a human being instead of a liability. That's all I did. The room fell silent. Dr. Okonkwo shifted uncomfortably. Patricia stared at Daniel with an expression he couldn't read. You talked to her, she repeated slowly. About what? Daniel took a breath, forcing calm. About life, about purpose, about why I became a doctor. I told her she wasn't alone. He met Patricia's eyes directly. I told her she mattered. One lawyer scoffed, but Patricia raised a hand to silence him. She studied Daniel for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. No one's talked to Eleanor like that in 20 years, Patricia said quietly, myself included. The confession hung in the air. Dr. Okonkwo cleared his throat uncomfortably. I want to see her, Patricia said, and I want Dr. Adebayo to come with me. Ward 7 looked different in daylight. The darkness and rain had given way to harsh, fluorescent lights. But the real difference was Eleanor herself. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling with fierce intensity. Patricia entered first, heels clicking on linoleum. Daniel hung back near the door. Eleanor, Patricia said gently. It's Patricia. Can you hear me? Eleanor's eyes shifted, focusing on her sister's face. Then, with agonizing slowness, her right hand lifted from the bed, trembling with effort. Her fingers reached past Patricia, pointing directly at Daniel. Patricia turned. You want Dr. Adebayo? Eleanor's hand trembled harder. Yes. Daniel stepped forward, heart hammering. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm here. Eleanor's eyes locked onto his face, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Her mouth worked, fighting paralysis, trying to form words. Daniel leaned closer and finally understood. She was whispering the same thing over and over. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Patricia covered her mouth, her own eyes filling. The lawyers stood frozen, witnesses to something they couldn't explain with precedent or science. Daniel took Eleanor's trembling hand gently. You're welcome, Mrs. Blackwood. You're going to be okay now. Over the next week, Eleanor's recovery defied every medical prediction. Brain scans showed activity in regions that had been dark for months. Her muscle response improved daily. She began forming words, short sentences that came out slurred, but understandable. And every day, she asked for Daniel. It became a routine that baffled the staff. Each afternoon, after his rounds, Daniel spent 30 minutes in Ward 7. Not treating Eleanor medically, the specialists handled that, but simply talking, sharing stories, treating her like a person instead of a medical miracle. They think I'm crazy, Daniel told her on the 5th day. The other doctors say I'm wasting time. Eleanor's speech had improved enough for short conversations. You are needed here, more than you know. I'm a junior doctor who sleeps in a storage room. I'm not sure how needed I am. Eleanor's hand reached for his, her grip stronger now. Tell me about your father. So Daniel did. He told her about the man who'd taught him to fish, who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for his education, who'd died because surgery cost more than their family's annual income. He told her about the helplessness and rage that had forged his determination to become a doctor. "He sounds like a good man," Eleanor whispered. "He was the best man I ever knew." Eleanor was quiet, staring at their joined hands. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "I had a daughter, 20 years ago. She was 6. Daniel waited, sensing this was important. "Cancer. Leukemia. We had all the money, best doctors, best hospitals, everything money could buy." Tears slid down her cheeks. It wasn't enough. She died anyway. "I'm so sorry," Daniel said quietly. "After she died, I changed. I decided if money couldn't save her, I would have so much money that nothing else could hurt me." Eleanor's grip tightened. "I became the person no one could touch. No one could hurt. No one could love." She turned to look at Daniel directly. "I became a monster." "You're not a monster," Daniel said firmly. "You don't know what I've done, the people I've destroyed, the lives I've ruined." Eleanor's tears came harder. "The day I collapsed, I was about to ruin someone's life for no reason except I could." Daniel sat with her pain, not diminishing it. "What changed?" Eleanor's smile was sad and broken. You reminded me that I was still human, still worthy of basic dignity. You didn't know who I was, didn't know my wealth, didn't fear my power. You just saw a person who needed help. If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comment section. The truth was, Eleanor hadn't just been unconscious during her coma. She'd been aware, trapped in her body, unable to move or speak, but conscious of everything. She'd heard every cruel comment. She'd felt every rough touch. She'd listened to her family discuss her like a problem to solve rather than a person to mourn. And in that darkness, she'd been forced to confront who she'd become. Every business rival crushed. Every employee fired without mercy. Every relationship destroyed in her quest for power. The coma had been a mirror she couldn't look away from, reflecting every terrible choice since her daughter's death. She'd wanted to die, prayed for it, hoped each day would be her last. Then Daniel walked into her room with warm water and gentle hands, speaking to her like she mattered, and something in her darkness cracked open. A tiny seed of hope, buried under 20 years of ice, began to thaw. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor's physical recovery continued to astound the medical team. She regained movement in her legs. Her speech returned to normal. Specialists declared it the most remarkable coma recovery they'd ever witnessed. But Daniel noticed Eleanor was planning something. He could see it in her eyes, the way she asked careful questions about the hospital, about his life, about his mother's health. "What are you thinking about?" he asked one afternoon. Eleanor turned with a small smile. "I'm thinking about repayment." "You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Blackwood." "Eleanor, and yes, I do. You saved my life. I just bathed you and talked to you. Any decent person would have done the same." "But they didn't," Eleanor said firmly. "For 93 days, no one did. Only you." She paused. "I want to do something for you. For your mother. For this hospital." Daniel shook his head. "I didn't help you for a reward." "I know. That's why you deserve one." Eleanor's expression grew serious. "Let me help, Daniel. Let me use what I have to do something good for once." Before Daniel could respond, Dr. Okonkwo burst into the room, his face flushed with anger. Behind him came 2 security guards and another man in an expensive suit. "Dr. Adebayo," Okonkwo said, voice tight with fury, "you're suspended effective immediately. Surrender your ID badge and leave the premises." Daniel stood slowly, mind racing. Suspended? For what? The suit stepped forward. For inappropriate fraternization with a patient. For spending excessive time with Mrs. Blackwood without medical justification. For creating a distraction that has disrupted hospital operations." "That's insane," Daniel protested. "I've been helping her recovery." "You've been bothering her," the man corrected coldly. "Mrs. Blackwood's family has filed a formal complaint about your behavior. They believe you're taking advantage of her vulnerable state." Eleanor tried to sit up, eyes blazing. "That's a lie. I never—" "Mrs. Blackwood," the man interrupted smoothly. "You're still recovering from trauma. Your judgment may be impaired. We're protecting your interests." "My interests?" Eleanor's voice rose, strong and clear. "My interests are being protected by the one person in this building who treated me like a human being." But the security guards were already moving toward Daniel. Okonkwo held out his hand. "Your badge, Dr. Adebayo." Daniel's hands trembled as he removed the ID badge he'd worked 12 years to earn. The badge that represented every sacrifice his family had made, every late night studying, every impossible exam. He placed it in Okonkwo's palm, feeling like he was cutting out a piece of his heart. "This isn't right," Eleanor said, voice breaking. "Patricia, tell them this is wrong." But Patricia wasn't there. The suit smiled coldly. "Your sister thought it best to distance herself from this situation. She agrees Dr. Adebayo's behavior has been inappropriate." Eleanor's face went white. The betrayal in her eyes was absolute. After everything, Patricia had abandoned her again. Daniel met Eleanor's gaze across the room as guards took his arms. "It's okay," he said quietly. "It's going to be okay." But they both knew he was lying. Daniel was escorted out like a criminal, past staring nurses and whispering doctors. His small room had already been emptied, his possessions stuffed into a garbage bag. He stood on the street outside Lagos General Hospital, where he'd worked for 5 years, and felt his world collapse. His phone rang. His mother. "Daniel, Beta, what's wrong?" He couldn't tell her, couldn't explain he'd been fired, that his career might be over, that everything they'd sacrificed for had crumbled. "I'm fine, Mama. Just tired. How are you feeling?" After they hung up, Daniel sat on a bench across from the hospital and let himself feel the full weight of what had happened. He'd done the right thing. He knew he'd done the right thing. But the right thing had cost him everything. Rain began to fall. Daniel didn't move. He just sat there, letting water soak through his clothes, watching the hospital where his dreams had died. Inside Ward 7, Eleanor Blackwood was making phone calls. Her voice was weak, but her determination was absolute. She called lawyers, accountants, board members. She called in favors accumulated over decades of power. She called people who owed her, people who feared her, people who would do anything she asked. And she began to plan. 3 days later, Daniel received a letter at his mother's house where he'd been staying, sleeping on the couch, avoiding her questions. The envelope was thick, expensive paper, with no return address. Inside was a single page, handwritten in elegant script. "Daniel, by the time you read this, I will be gone from Lagos General. My family is moving me to a private facility in London, away from scandal and questions. They think they're protecting me. They're protecting themselves. But I want you to know something. Every word you spoke to me in that dark room, I heard. You reminded me that beneath the money and power and ice, I was still human, still capable of feeling, still worthy of dignity. I spent 20 years building walls to keep pain out. But walls don't just keep pain out. They keep everything out. Love, joy, connection, humanity. I became so afraid of being hurt that I forgot how to be alive. You saved my life, Daniel, not by waking me from the coma, by reminding me why life was worth waking up for. I cannot undo what my family has done to you, but I can do something else, something that matters. Check your mother's medical account. Check your bank account. And most importantly, check on the hospital in 3 weeks. This is not payment. You cannot pay someone for giving you back your soul. This is simply me trying to remember how to be human again. Trying to use what I have for good instead of power. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else saw a problem. Thank you for talking to me like I mattered when everyone else wanted me to disappear. You are going to be an extraordinary doctor, Daniel. Not because of your skill, though I'm certain you're skilled. But because you understand that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about dignity, connection, remembering that every body contains a soul. Don't stop being who you are. The world needs more people like you. With gratitude and respect, Eleanor Daniel read the letter 3 times, hands shaking. Then he called the hospital billing department. His mother's heart medication, the expensive treatment she needed but couldn't afford, had been paid in full. 6 months of treatment, covered completely. He checked his bank account. The balance made him sit down hard. Enough money to cover rent for a year, enough to eat properly, enough to breathe. But the letter mentioned one more thing. Check on the hospital in 3 weeks. Daniel didn't have to wait that long. The news broke 2 weeks later, making headlines across Lagos. An anonymous donor had purchased Lagos General Hospital and announced complete renovation. New equipment, increased staff salaries, a new wing dedicated to providing free care to patients who couldn't afford treatment. The donor had one condition, that Dr. Daniel Adebayo be reinstated immediately with a promotion to head of the new charitable care wing, and that his termination be expunged from all records. Dr. Okonkwo, faced with losing his position in the reorganization, had no choice but to comply. The expensive suit disappeared. The board was replaced wholesale. And Daniel, standing in his mother's living room watching the news, understood. Eleanor Blackwood hadn't just saved his career. She'd transformed it, given him exactly what he'd always wanted, the ability to help people without worrying about money or politics or power. He tried to call her. The number didn't work. He tried to email her company. No response. Eleanor had disappeared into her recovery, into her new life, leaving behind only evidence of her transformation. 6 months passed. Daniel threw himself into his work at the new charitable care wing, treating patients who'd never had access to quality medical care. He hired nurses who cared about people. He created protocols that put dignity before efficiency. His mother's health improved with treatment she could finally afford. She asked constantly what had changed, how he'd managed to pay for everything. He never told her the full story. He just said sometimes, when you do the right thing, good things happen. Then, on a Tuesday evening exactly 1 year after the night he'd bathed a comatose woman in Ward 7, Daniel was working late when security called. Someone at the gate was asking for him. "Send her up," Daniel said, curious. When Eleanor Blackwood walked through his door, he almost didn't recognize her. The Ice Queen from newspaper photos was gone. This woman wore simple clothes, minimal makeup, and a genuine smile that transformed her entire face. She looked younger, lighter, as if she'd put down a burden carried for decades. "Hello, Daniel," she said softly. He stood quickly. "Eleanor, didn't know you were back in Lagos. I'm not. Not permanently. I just came for the day." She gestured to the new wing visible through his window. "I wanted to see what you'd built. What we built. This wouldn't exist without you." Eleanor shook her head. "No. This exists because of who you are. I just provided resources. You provided the vision, the heart." They talked for an hour. Eleanor told him about her time in London, the therapy she'd started, the slow, painful process of reconnecting with her family, about learning to feel again without being destroyed by feeling, about discovering that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was the only way to actually live. "I've started a foundation," she said. funding medical care for families who can't afford it, inspired by a young doctor who told me about his father. Daniel felt his eyes sting. My father would have loved that. I think he'd be proud of you. I know I am. As she stood to leave, Daniel stopped her. Why did you really come back today? Eleanor smiled, sad and beautiful. Because I needed you to know that miracles work both ways. You think you saved me that night in Ward 7. But really, I saved myself. I'd been drowning for 20 years, and your kindness threw me a rope. You showed me it was possible to climb back to the surface. She took his hand, the same way he'd held hers in that dark hospital room. I wanted to say thank you in person, and I wanted you to know that somewhere out there, there's a woman who used to be a monster, who's learning to be human again. And it's because of you. Eleanor left quietly, disappearing into the Lagos evening. Daniel watched her go, then turned back to his office, to the patients waiting, to the life he'd built from kindness and broken dreams and one miraculous night in Ward 7. Outside, rain began to fall, gentle this time, washing the city clean. And in the new charitable care wing of Lagos General Hospital, a young doctor who'd once bathed, a billionaire in darkness, continued his work, treating every patient like they mattered, remembering that healing was about more than medicine. It was about reminding people they were human, that they deserved dignity, that they were worth saving, just like someone had once reminded him. If this story touched your heart, do us a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what you think, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories like this. Because every week, we bring you African tales that remind us what it means to be human. Stories that prove kindness is never wasted. Stories that show miracles happen when we treat each other with dignity and love. Subscribe now, and let's keep these stories alive together.